Welcome back to Steady Badges Stories. I'm glad you're here. If this is your first time, hit that subscribe button and stay a while. We tell the kind of stories that remind you who people really are underneath everything they carry. And if you're a regular, you already know. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from today. I love seeing those. Alright, settle in, this one's going to stay with you. Nobody at Pinecrest Regional ever asked Wren Holt where she came from. That was the thing about small hospital towns in northern Ontario. People moved there to disappear, and everyone was polite enough to let them. Wren had shown up 4 years ago with a reference letter from a nursing college in Ottawa, decent hands, and the kind of face that didn't invite questions. She wore her dark hair pulled back tight. She moved through the hallways the way water moves around stone, quiet, efficient, without drama. The other nurses liked her well enough, in the way you like a piece of furniture that's always exactly where you left it. She worked the day shift on the medical surgical floor. She changed dressings and administered medication and sat with patients at 3 a.m, when their families had gone home and the dark felt too large. She ate her lunch alone in the break room, reading paperbacks with bent spines, and she was always the one who stayed late when someone called in sick. Not because she was eager, but because she didn't seem to have anywhere else to be. The charge nurse, a broad-shouldered woman named Claudette who had been at Pinecrest for 22 years, once told a new hire that Wren was the most competent nurse on the floor and also the most unknowable. "She's like one of those lakes up north," Claudette said. "Looks calm from the surface. Don't know how deep it goes." Nobody knew about the calluses on Wren's hands that had nothing to do with nursing. Nobody noticed the way her eyes swept a room when she entered it. Exits first, then threats, then people. Nobody knew that the name Wren Holt was her mother's maiden name. Or that before nursing school, before Ottawa, before any of this, she had gone by something else entirely in places most Canadians would struggle to find on a map. They had called her Sparrow. The gala was the hospital board's idea. Pinecrest Regional was not a rich institution. It served a catchment area of roughly 40,000 people scattered across boreal forest and frozen lake country, and it ran on provincial funding and the occasional donor dinner. Once a year, the board organized a fundraising event at the Lakeview Inn, which was the nicest venue within 100 kilometers, and they invited the sort of people who had cottages in Muskoka and felt generous after 2 glasses of wine. Wren was asked to attend as staff representation. She said yes because Claudette asked her personally, and because saying no would have required an explanation. She wore the only dress she owned, navy blue, bought 3 years ago for a colleague's wedding. She stood near the back of the room and drank water and watched the auction items. Someone had donated a week at a ski lodge. Someone else had donated a signed jersey from the Maple Leafs. The keynote speaker was a man named Gordon Fitch. Wren had seen the name on the program. She hadn't paid it particular attention. Gordon Fitch was a retired politician turned philanthropist who had apparently donated a significant sum to the hospital's cardiac unit the previous year. He was tall, early 60s, with silver hair and the comfortable ease of a man who had spent 4 decades in rooms where everyone was glad to see him. He spoke well. Wren would give him that. He talked about community and service and the unsung heroes of Canadian healthcare. He made the audience laugh twice and lean forward once, and then, about 12 minutes in, he turned and looked directly at Wren. "I want to tell you about a nurse I met backstage tonight," he said. Wren felt something go very still inside her. "I asked her about her work," Gordon Fitch continued, smiling at the room the way you smile when you found the perfect illustration for your point. "And she told me, very quietly, that she's been here for 4 years. 4 years in a town most of my colleagues in Toronto couldn't name." He paused for effect. "That's sacrifice, ladies and gentlemen. That's the quiet heroism we don't celebrate enough." The room applauded. Heads turned. Wren smiled because not smiling would have drawn more attention. She had not told him that. She had said hello in the corridor, and he had shaken her hand and moved on. And now here she was, a prop in someone else's story about generosity. Her 4 years of deliberate invisibility offered up as a teaching moment for a room full of strangers who would forget her name before they reached the valet stand. She set her water glass down on a nearby table. She had been set dressed into someone's narrative before. It felt the same every time. Like being picked up and placed somewhere without being asked. She went home at 9:30 and did not speak about it. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday in November, everything changed. The shift had been ordinary up until 2:17 in the afternoon. Wren was completing a medication reconciliation at the nursing station when she heard the automatic doors of the emergency bay open and heard, a second later, a sound she recognized in a place below conscious thought. The particular quiet of someone trying very hard not to make noise while their body was failing. She stood up from the desk. In the corridor outside the ER, a man was being held upright by another man. The one doing the holding was broad and expressionless, military short hair, wearing civilian clothes that fit the way civilian clothes fit on someone who doesn't usually wear them. The one being held was tall, lean, and the left side of his jacket was dark and wet in a way that had nothing to do with the weather outside. "We need a trauma bay," the man doing the holding said to the first nurse who reached him, which was not Wren. It was Justine, one of the ear nurses, who stepped forward and began the intake questions. Behind her came Dr. Ballard, the on-call physician, already pulling on gloves. There were 3 other staff members in motion within seconds. The protocol worked the way it was supposed to. Wren stood at the edge of the corridor and watched. The injured man. She could see now that he was somewhere in his mid-40s, dark-haired, with the kind of jaw that has taken a hit or two. Was being transferred to a gurney. He was conscious. His eyes were moving. They landed on Wren for a moment, and she saw something in them that was not fear exactly, but its practical cousin. The look of someone making fast calculations about resources. GSW left thoracic. The man doing the holding said to Dr. Ballard. "Entry point below the axilla. He's been down 11 minutes. No exit wound." Dr. Ballard looked up sharply. "How do you know all that? I was there." Wren watched Dr. Ballard's face do the thing doctors' faces do when they're deciding how much time they have to ask follow-up questions. He decided he didn't have any. "Get him in Bay 2, he said, and the team moved. The man who had carried the patient in remained in the corridor. Wren looked at him. He was looking at her. "You're Holt," he said. Not a question. She felt the familiar stillness spread through her chest. "I'm a nurse on the medical surgical floor," she said. "You want the I want you." He said it without drama, the way you state a preference for a seat on the aisle. "My name is Sergeant Aldous Crane, retired. 14 years, Joint Task Force 2. He paused. "I know who you are. You have the wrong person. Your call sign was Sparrow." He said it quietly enough that no one passing in the corridor could have heard. "You served with Captain Dale Holt, who is, as of roughly 40 minutes ago, the man in Bay 2. Wren did not move for 3 full seconds. "Your father is the one who sent me to find you," Aldous said. "He said you'd push back. He said to tell you the word anyway." He said the word. She closed her eyes for one breath. Then she was already moving toward Bay 2. The situation in Bay 2 was deteriorating. Dr. Ballard was good. Wren knew that, and she was not here to contradict him. But she had spent 2 years as a combat medic before her advancement into special operations, and she had seen a left thoracic GSW without exit wound exactly 4 times, and she knew things about it that didn't appear in the standard trauma protocol at a regional hospital in northern Ontario. "The bullet is sitting against the pericardium," she said from the doorway. Dr. Ballard turned. "Excuse me?" "Entry below the left axilla, no exit wound, and he's showing JVD on the right side. You can see it if you look." She walked into the bay. "His heart sounds are going to be muffled. Check them." A pause. Justine glanced at Dr. Ballard. "Who are you?" Dr. Ballard said, not unkindly, but with the particular energy of a person whose authority has just been walked into. "Wren Holt, medical surgical. Check his heart sounds." The stethoscope came out. A pause that lasted 4 seconds. Dr. Ballard's expression shifted. "Beck's triad," he said, mostly to himself. "Yes." Wren moved to the supply cabinet. Her hands knew where things were. Her hands had always known where things were. "You need a needle decompression, and you need to call Sudbury for a cardiothoracic consult right now, because if that bullet shifts with the decompression, I know what happens if it shifts." Dr. Ballard's voice was crisper now, not defensive. Engaged. He was a good doctor. "Justine, get me a 14 gauge. Someone call Sudbury." And he looked at Wren. "Stay." She stayed. The next 40 minutes were the kind that compress time. There is no before and after in a trauma bay when things are going badly. There is only the next action and the one after that. Wren worked alongside the team without being asked, handing instruments, monitoring the patient's oxygen saturation, holding pressure at the moments that required it. She did not take over. She did not perform. She simply moved into the gaps. The man on the table, her father, did not say her name. His eyes found her 3 times in those 40 minutes, and each time she met them with the same level look she'd given patients in field conditions a decade ago. The look that said, "I see you. I'm working. Trust the process." He trusted the process. At 3:59, the Sudbury cardiothoracic surgeon was on the phone with Dr. Ballard, and the decision was made to airlift. The patient was stable enough to transport. The bleeding was controlled. The bullet had not shifted. Wren stepped back from the gurney. Her hands were steady. They had been steady the entire time. That was one of the things she had learned about herself, in a country she was not allowed to name to most people she would ever meet. Her hands did not shake during, only after. After was for later. During was for the work. She stripped off her gloves. Aldous Crane was still in the corridor. He was sitting on the bench outside the ear, elbows on his knees, looking at the floor with the concentrated patience of a man who has learned to wait without needing to be comfortable. When Wren came through the door, he looked up. "He's alive," she said. Aldous let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "Good, he's being airlifted to Sudbury. Cardiothoracic." She sat down on the other end of the bench. "How bad was it?" "Bad enough," he paused. "He was at a fishing camp north of Chaplow, him and 2 others. They were. It's not my story to tell. But someone knew they were there." Wren looked at the middle distance. The fluorescent light above them hummed. A cart wheeled past and neither of them moved. How did you know where I was? He's been keeping track of you since you left service. Aldous said it without apology. He didn't reach out. He said you'd made yourself clear about that. But he kept track. That's very him. He said you were the best medic JTF2 ever produced. Said it to anyone who'd listen. A pause. Said it to me about 100 times over 6 years. Wren absorbed that. It sat somewhere in her chest at an angle, the way certain truths do, not comfortable but real. He could have called. Could you have picked up? She didn't answer. The corridor hummed and breathed around them. Somewhere down the hall, a patient was asking a nurse about dinner. Somewhere outside, the helicopter pad lights would be coming on. The ordinary machinery of the place continued without reference to anything that had happened in the last 2 hours. He wrote you a letter, Aldous said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out an envelope that had clearly been folded and unfolded a number of times, the paper soft at the creases. He held it out. Wren looked at it for a moment. She took it. She didn't open it. Why did he send you and not someone else? She said. Because I was available. And because... Aldous paused in the way of a man choosing honesty over convenience. Because he knew I'd come back without you if that's what you decided. He said he wasn't asking you to change anything. He just needed the best person in the room. I'm a medical surgical nurse in Pinecrest, Ontario. Yes, Aldous said. That's what you are right now. She looked at him. He also said you'd argue about it, Aldous added, and that I should let you, because it usually means you're already deciding. Something shifted in Wren's face that might, in better light, have been almost a smile. He's still insufferable. Completely, Aldous agreed. 3 days later, Wren drove the 4 hours south to Sudbury. She had arranged the time off without explaining why, which was easy because she had 3 weeks of accumulated leave and had never once asked for any of it. Claudette had simply looked at her for a long moment and then nodded, the way people nod when they understand something they weren't told. The ICU at Health Sciences North was bright and smelled like every ICU everywhere. Antiseptic and recycled air and the faint electrical hum of monitoring equipment. Wren had spent time in ICUs in conditions that made this one look like a resort, and she had never entirely lost the reflex of cataloging the exits. Captain Dale Holt, retired, 61 years old, looking considerably older than she remembered and simultaneously more like himself than anyone she had braced herself to see, was sitting up at 45 degrees when she walked in. There were tubes and monitors and the general hardware of serious medical intervention. There was also, inexplicably, a crossword puzzle on the tray table. He looked up. She had practiced not having a particular expression ready, and she still wasn't sure she'd managed it. You came, he said. Don't read too much into it, she said. I'm here professionally. You're an interesting case. 7 across, he said, holding up the crossword. Former Canadian Special Operations Unit. 8 letters. That's not a real crossword clue. It's my crossword. She sat down in the chair beside the bed. It was a hard chair, the kind designed to discourage long stays, and she sat in it with the same quality of attention she brought to everything, complete, and giving nothing away. He set the crossword down. For a long moment neither of them said anything, and it was not an uncomfortable silence so much as a full one, the kind that accumulates over 6 years of no contact and requires more space than a few seconds could hold. I read the letter, she said eventually. I know. Aldous texted me. You texted him from the ICU? I borrowed a nurse's phone. He paused. She was very understanding. Wren looked at her hands. You should have called. You should have picked up. I might have. Might isn't the same thing. No, she said. It's not. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Outside the window, Sudbury in November was all gray sky, and the particular beautiful bleakness of the Canadian Shield in late autumn, the rock and the birch trees stripped bare and completely unapologetic about it. I didn't want to be found, Wren said. I know, I built something there. It's quiet. It works. I know that too. He was watching her with the same gray eyes she had been seeing in mirrors for 38 years. I wasn't asking you to come back. I wanted you to know where I was, if you ever wanted to know. That's all. That's a lot, he agreed. I suppose it is. She sat with that for a while. The crossword sat on the tray table between them, half completed, 7 across, still blank. It occurred to her that he'd probably known the answer and left it empty on purpose. He had always been insufferable that way. Strategic at the cellular level, incapable of a single unplanned gesture. She also thought about the fishing camp north of Chapleau, and the dark wet left side of his jacket in a hospital corridor. She had spent 4 years treating as a safe and ordinary place, and the fact that when Aldous Crane had said your father sent me, the thing she had felt. Underneath the stillness, underneath the calculation, underneath the 4 years of deliberate forgetting, was something very close to relief. She picked up the crossword. She filled in 7 across. You knew, she said. I guessed, he said. Same thing with you. He smiled. It looked like her smile, the one she didn't use often, and she was annoyed to discover that this particular detail still affected her. I'm not moving back, she said. I know. I like it up there. I believe you. I'm going to go back to my shift on Thursday. Of course you are. She put the crossword down. She looked at him for a moment. The tubes, the monitors, the crossword, the gray eyes, the 61 years that had accumulated into this particular person in this particular room. You have to stop fishing in remote locations without a proper evac plan, she said. That's fair, he said. It's not negotiable. Also fair. She stood up. She adjusted the blanket on the bed, which did not need adjusting, and did it anyway because her hands needed something to do, and she was not going to let him see them shaking now. Not after 40 minutes in a trauma bay without a tremor. I'll come back on Saturday, she said. For the case. Medically, you're still an interesting case. Of course, he said. She picked up her coat from the chair. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and did not turn around. Dad, she said. Yeah, don't do it again. She heard him exhale long and slow, the breath of a man who has been holding something in his chest for 6 years and has finally been given permission to let it go. I won't, he said. She walked out into the corridor. She kept her head up. She passed the nursing station and the waiting room, and the row of windows looking out onto the gray November sky. And she did not stop until she reached the stairwell. And in the stairwell, she stood very still for 37 seconds with her back against the wall, and her eyes closed and let her hands shake as long as they needed to. Then she went back to her life. But this time, she knew where he was. And that's the story. I want to say something before you go. You've been listening for a while now, and I don't take that lightly. These stories, the ones about people who bury themselves in quiet places and think they've outrun what shaped them, they matter to me because I think most of us know that feeling. The one where you've folded yourself down to fit somewhere safe, and then life walks in through the ER doors and asks you to be the full version of yourself anyway. Wren didn't choose to be found, but she also didn't walk away. That's the whole thing right there. If this one landed for you, share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe to Steady Badge's stories if you haven't yet. There's a lot more where this came from, and drop a comment. Seriously. Tell me where you're listening from, tell me what part got you. I read every single one. Take care of yourselves out there. I'll see you in the next one.